Good morning.
Turn it up, Isaac.
Pardon me? Oh, I thought somebody said something to me. So we are in the 103rd day of the 105-day legislative session. The legislature is supposed to adjourn on Sunday, but they're actually going to finish up their work today. They're not going to work over the weekend. But they have not yet reached an agreement on the budget, either the operating budget or the capital budget. And in order for the government to continue to function, that means schools and parks and all those things, they have to agree on a budget before June 30th. So the governor will call them back for special session starting next week. And the way special sessions work, it's kind of like an overtime in a football game or a basketball game. They are called for 30 days. And if they don't finish their work in 30 days, essentially they're still deadlocked, then they get called for another 30 days. But if they finish before, they can get done and get out of there. So they are trying to agree on a $43 billion with a B, dollar budget for the state. And the big holdup is education and how to solve the education funding issues that the state is dealing with, which I can go into more detail if you're interested in a bit. So what will happen is they will finish up their work and they will go home and the governor will call the special session in only a small group of legislators, those representing the four caucuses of the state legislature, being the House Republican caucus, the Senate Republican caucus, the House Democrats, and the Senate Democrats. They have all elected a couple people from each of their groups to serve as sort of negotiators, sort of team captains, if you will, to negotiate the education issue and the budget for the next 2 years. So they have to reach that agreement. If they don't reach agreement and pass a budget by June 30th, the government will shut down and will not be able to function other than essential and emergency type operations. So they're under the gun to do that. They have to adopt a budget in the state of Washington by June 30th. Somebody asked in the last class, so I'll tell you this, the budget is a bill just like any other bill. It's a very long piece of legislation that has every single agency in it, Department of Natural Resources, Office of Schools, the school superintendent, which is the school's budget, the Department of Ecology, the Department of Parks, all those different agencies. It's a long bill and says, here's how much money we're giving each of you, and this is what we want you to spend it on. And so that takes a long time to get done. They should have been done by now, but they're not. So we'll see how long they end up in special session. But I predict that it will be the end of June before they finally get done. With respect to 1513, the bill did not make it, not pass the legislature. And so it is essentially dead for this session, which is unfortunate. In the end, I think there just weren't enough legislators who were really super excited about it. And I think part of also the issue with the Secretary of State and them needing to update their computer systems, I think it feels like to some legislators they need to do that first. So although we didn't get the bill, there's still something we can do. And what I'd like to do is draft a letter from you all and have you all sign it to the budget negotiators for the House and Senate, asking them to fund the Secretary of State's request. Recall when we met with Greg last time, he talked about their request for money to update their computer systems so that once they do update those computer systems, then we could potentially move forward with the bill to register 16 and 17-year-olds early. So I think it's really important that we make sure that they get that budget request funded. So what I'd like to do is take your talking points, draft a letter, have you all sign it, and we send it to the budget negotiators. So hopefully that ends up in the final budget. And that way that will set us up to have the bill be able to move forward next year in 2018. Another question that came up in last class, which I'll just throw out there now, is I'll remind you, we talked about this before, we're in a biennium. So the 2017 to 2019 biennium, that means 2 years. So bills that were introduced in the 2017 session but did not pass, like 1513, at the end of this session, they're not dead forever. They revert back to their house of origin, which in this case would be the House. So the 1513 will be sent back to the House once they adjourn. And then it's still alive next session. It can be revived by the legislature and amended and passed in 2018. So bills stay alive for 2 years. They're technically alive until the end of the 2018 session. Then if a bill doesn't pass, it's dead, and it has to be reintroduced as a new bill in the 2019 session. So with that, I'll pause for questions on either process, budget, or our bill. So a question way in the back.
So I'm just like a tiny bit confused about, so is the budget for the computers and stuff, the thing that you're asking us to email them about, is that what the $40-ish billion is going?
It's a piece of it. So remember, like I said, the budget's for the whole state. It's $43 billion. And it has every agency in there: schools, parks, natural resources, the fire departments, and everything you can think of that is government. One of the sections of that is the Secretary of State's budget. And they get money to run the elections. That's what the state gives them. The legislature gives them part of our tax dollars to run our elections. What the secretary has asked for is a little bit more, and I can't remember the number right now. I think it was a few $1 million to update their computer system so that in the future they would be able to accommodate the 16-year-old pre-registrations. That's part of what they would do as an update. So what we'll be writing a letter to the budget writers on is, hey guys, when you negotiate this whole $43 billion on all these other things, make sure you fund this small request for the updated computer systems for the Secretary of State, because we really think it's important, because that's what will allow us to advance forward on this issue of pre-registration for young people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the middle.
So you said that 1513 could come back alive again in the next session. Is that also true for 5110?
Yes. Every bill that was introduced in this session is still technically alive until the end of the 2018 session. And remember, they can amend it. So over the interim, could be that the legislators get together and they go, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? Now the Secretary of State hopefully has their money to fix their computers. Now let's all work together and try to come up with a plan for Temperance Day for 16-year-olds. And maybe that is all written into a bill and added on to 1513. Maybe it's on to 5110. But those bills can be moved along or amended or whatever until the end of the 2018 session. Yeah, over on the side.
Were there any specific districts that are within Washington that were more towards Senate Bill 1513 than others?
I wouldn't call it districts generally. I think there were definitely legislators who were much more excited about it. One of them obviously being the sponsor, Representative Berquist. Which I think a bunch of you guys met him when you were down there. He's the social studies teacher from South Seattle. I'm trying to remember his district, Burien area. So, I mean, he was very excited about it. Senator Hunt from here in Olympia is very excited about it. And then there were others that were just sort of like either not really into it, or nobody was really opposed to the Temperance Day, I don't think. But I think there just wasn't a lot of excitement about it, partly because the bill got skinnied down so much just into that Temperance Day piece. I think if we can get the budget requests going and get the Secretary of State to update their system, then I think we could probably generate some more interest in the broader issues that were in both bills. Yeah. Right back, let's see, denim shirt, I think. Or a sweatshirt. Hi.
When the bill gets reintroduced back in 2018, does it like continue where it left off or where it died, or does it start completely over again?
So it reverts when they adjourn. The end of session is called adjourning sine die. You can look that up if you want. It's a Latin term. It's SINEDIE. It's two different words. So they adjourn sine die. That means they're done. And when they adjourn sine die, during that process, and you can watch it on TV, I can pull up and you can see it. It's a whole process where the House and the Senate send each other's bills back to them. So the Senate will send all House bills that didn't pass back over to the House, and they sit in House rules. And they can be pulled up at any time the following session during the 2018 session. But they will be back in House bills that didn't pass will be back in the House, and Senate bills that didn't pass will be back in the Senate.
You want to know where exactly does it go back? Did it go back to the committee where?
House Rules Committee.
Rules. The other one, you may not be able to see off to the left, go ahead.
Is the $43 billion budget what they have to spend, or is it like an estimated amount that they're going?
Yeah, well, so last budget, last biennium was around 40 billion. And there's what is called, when they come into Olympia, it's what's called maintenance level expectation. That is, you spent $100,000 on, I'm making up this right now, you spend $100,000 on state parks. That's not the right number, but I'm just using it as an example. $100,000 in state parks in last biennium. Because of inflation and increased costs to get the same level of service, maintain the same level of service you had on that park, you need to spend $105,000 this year. So the $40 billion budget from last biennium automatically costs a little bit more just based on what is maintenance level spending because of those factors, just increased costs and inflation and all those kinds of things. So it's approximately that much. Now they're in dispute right now as whether they should raise more money through more taxes or other means to spend more. But it's going to be around 43 billion. What has to be funded is there are identified in the state government certain functions that must continue to be funded. Emergency services and things like that, 911, all of that has to be funded. Has to keep going even if they don't adopt a budget by June 30th, but things that are called non-essential, parks and some healthcare stuff and things like that, that has to be, a budget has to be adopted for those things by June 30th or they stop. And actually, in fact, in May, the government has to send out pink slips or layoff notices to all workers who would lose their jobs if the government doesn't continue to work after June 30th. So it's a pretty big deadline. They really have to do it. But there is a distinction between things that are like, they couldn't shut down the prisons, for example, and just send all the prisoners free, obviously. But the rest of the stuff that is non-essential, they have to adopt a budget by June 30th or those functions will shut down. Yeah, in front.
If the government shuts down, does it stay shut down until the start of the next legislative session?
No, until they adopt a budget.
Oh, okay.
But you could see a situation where you have people laid off for like a week. Like you don't have a job until we figure out how to pass a budget. I don't think that's going to happen. They will get this budget done, but it'll probably be in the end of June when they do it. Yeah.
So does the $43 billion budget go to like building like new bridges and like parks and stuff, or is it just like?
So that is a very good question. So there are actually 3 total budgets. One of them is the operating budget. Now in the operating budget, it's things like healthcare, schools, education, not the school building, but schools, parks, Department of Corrections, which is prisons, natural resources like wildfire management, all those kinds of like basic government functions. Then there's the capital budget, and the capital budget is what is used to build infrastructure, that being school buildings, government buildings, museums, all those kinds of things. Also like clean energy, lots of different things are in the capital budget. That's building of things. And then there's a third budget, the transportation budget. And the transportation budget receives its revenue money from a different source. So operating and capital, there's bonding in there and it's kind of complicated, but essentially the operating and the capital budget are funded by property taxes, sales taxes, real estate taxes, all those kinds of things. The transportation budget, which builds bridges and roads and everything transportation, is funded mostly through the gas tax, but also some other taxes that are in the transportation space. So there's 3 different budgets, and you can tell what they are by transportation, operating, capital. The transportation budget has been agreed to, and I think will be passed today, and will be done. So all that's left is the operating and the capital. And I can't remember, I don't know, David, if you know off the top of your head, the amount of the transportation budget, but it's a big number as well. It's not 43 billion, but it's a big number. But those are the 3 budgets for the state. But the 43 billion is just operating, just the operating budget.
It's not the count.
In the front here.
All right, so I know that education is currently underfunded. How much is being sent to education right now, and how much are they expected to send to it relatively soon with the new budget?
Okay, this is a good question. And this is the fundamental question the legislature is trying to solve. And I'll do just a tiny bit of history for you. So there are two ways that schools are funded. First is through the operating budget, and that's primarily paid for by state property taxes. That is property taxes on your house or your business based on the value of that property. And then there are local levies. And so, you know, in Seattle, there's a local levy. Sometimes you vote on them. Local levies are also assessed on the property value of your house, but those dollars stay at the local district for funding programs there. The way it was originally set up is the state is supposed to pay for basic education. That's the fundamental basics of education, reading, writing, arithmetic, out of the state property tax piece. And then local levies are supposed to, or were originally intended to fund extras, extracurricular activities, those kinds of things. Over time, because the state has not kept up with its spending, local jurisdictions have ended up relying more on local levies to fund basic education. And some areas can get levies passed much easier than others. And also some end up spending a lot more. So like, for example, in Seattle, the property tax levy for schools is $1.23 per $1,000 of assessed value of your house. So you can do the math. $1.23 for every $1,000 your house is worth. If your house is $400,000, 400,000 times $1.23 is what you pay to Seattle for your local. Yeah, see, thanks. Your local for your schools. In Tacoma, it's $4 per assessed per 1,000. So we have a very kind of blotchy property tax system in the local levies across the state. And what the court said was, you the state need to take over the basic responsibility of basic education, and you need to stop relying on these local levies to fund basic education, because what happens is you have unequal education occurring across the state. That's a fundamental basis of what's happening. Now, how much more? I don't know. Over the last 4 years, the legislature has put another $3 billion into education as they've dealt with this court case. People are guessing we're probably going to put about another $1.5 billion out of this negotiation. And so the big question is, if it's $1.5 billion, where do you get that money? Do you change the levy system? Do you levy new taxes? What do you do to get that $1.5 billion? And then how do you spend that? On what programs should you spend it? And so that's the fundamental debate. So that's where we are. And I got to wrap up because I got to go to a meeting. But I'm planning on coming to do a in-person visit with you guys.
Hey.
Sometime in the next month. We'll get a date for that and maybe bring a legislator with me. Also, I'll work on a draft of that letter, and I'll get that sent to you so you can review it and make any changes as you see fit. And then we'll get that off to the budget writers. And any last minute quick questions?
You say.
What's the status of the capital budget? Like, how close is it to being agreed upon?
So the capital budget is a function of the operating budget, because the capital budget bonds, and if that's maybe Greg, you could go into what bonding is, but capital budget uses the operating budget to establish itself by selling bonds based on the credit rating of the state. So capital budget cannot be adopted until they agree to the operating budget. So they will be done together.
How close are they to establishing the education budget?
No, we'll see. They're going to start negotiating. It's probably going to be the end of June. Yep. Okay.
All right.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good weekend.
Bye. Have a good weekend. Bye.